You're listening to Overwatch Contenders Daily, your path to daily news, scores, and insights into the Overwatch League stars of tomorrow. Here's your host, LemonKiwi.
Overwatch fans, hope you're having a wonderful Wednesday. I'm just gonna try and make it a tiny bit better though. My name is LemonKiwi, and this is Overwatch Contenders Daily. And today I have such a knowledgeable guest coming on. Kevin, you know him as AVRL, commentator for the Pacific and Australian region. We're going to be going over the Australian quarterfinal matches that wrapped up yesterday. And not only the matches, but the historical significance and sort of the come up of the teams that are now in the top four and what can the bottom eight do to maybe reach top four next season. But knowledge bombs will be dropped in a minute. I want to go over a quick news segment. Overwatch contenders have dropped the news that the North American and European semifinals and grand finals will be taking place in Poland, but they've also dropped a picture of what I guess the venue is going to look like, and it's very lunar colony-esque. I have no idea. It looks like it's on Mars, but it's just the venue looks so cool, and I'm so excited. They also announced the date. It is going to be May 12th at 12 p.m. I think it's Central European Standard Time, which I think converts to 6 a.m. Eastern Time, so we're gonna have to get up a little bit early. And they also said it was May 12th and May 13th at 1 p.m. on that second day. They've also announced the talent lineup being Tech Girl as your main host, the casters from the European region, so Dez, Trid, and Leg Day, and Jaws, sorry, I forgot about Jaws, and the two NA casters, ZP and Jamerson, will be joining them to cover all the amazing Overwatch action there. But now, let's get into my interview with Kevin. Hey guys, so I'm here with Kevin. You know him as AVRL, and you also know him as the Contenders Pacific and Australian region commentator, and overall just a mastermind, and he's going to drop some knowledge bombs with me today about the Australian quarterfinals that did wrap up yesterday. Oh, that rhymed. But let's get into the matches that happened. Let's start with Dark-Sided versus Knock Predators, the final score being 3-0. But Knock, a bit of a history lesson here. They almost didn't qualify for Contenders. Like, AVRL, you were telling me they came 17th in Open Division, got in because the 16 team disbanded, and then they qualified through trials because 5 teams were allowed instead of 4, and then they got into Contenders and then playoffs. So what, like, an incredible, not only lucky journey, but they also worked really hard to get that far. So how does a team that goes 17th in Open Division end up in a top 8 Contenders spot?
Hey, Jen. So Knock Predators, yeah, lucky is one word. I would also say, like, they're definitely very fortunate. Lucky is definitely part of them getting in, at least to the Open Division part. So when they actually made it into trials, though, they had a pretty decent run, and they were sort of middle of the pack in trials. So I think this has always been a team that kind of, I don't know, maybe they choked a little bit in Open Division, just barely missed out, then got themselves in, but, worked hard is, I would say, pretty much accurate as well, because when they managed to get into Contenders, it was really very clear that they weren't going to be one of the bottom teams, and, Group B, which is where they ended up in, had a couple of the other really good teams in there, like Masterminds and Sydney Drop Bears, and very early on you could see that Knock was going to be one of the standouts because they were the only team in that entire group to prevent Masterminds from taking a 20-0 victory in the regular season, because Knock actually drew a map against Masterminds, which was technically not a loss for Masterminds, but the first time that they didn't win a map technically in that regular season either. So Knock Predators coming in, also beating, I'd say, in their group rivals were Alter Ego. So, really keeping up with the middle of the pack in Group B to make sure they get that top 8 spot. So they've obviously had a decent way to go now. They've had some big improvements over the season. And I'd say despite the 0-3 loss to Dark-Sided, they've had a, very respected run, a well-deserved result at the end of the day. They get to qualify back into Contenders. They don't have to go through trials again. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing how this team ends up continuing, where they continue to go, how much further they'll improve, because Season 2 Contenders, when this team comes around again, definitely expecting to see them, push up even further and really challenge for a higher seeding. So that'll be quite exciting to see as well.
Well, it is an incredible journey for them. Like, just now thinking about let's say, comparing this to NA contenders, how the trials teams that made it to contenders were bottomed out just because they hadn't faced that level of competition. For Nock to actually get at least the fourth, I think it was the fourth seed, but at least making it to playoffs, that's still an amazing achievement. Unfortunately, they did get knocked out immediately from Darksided, who leads me to my next question. Is a heavy favorite going into the playoffs. But what's interesting is they've gone through a significant roster reshaping coming into contenders, and they finished contenders being the only other undefeated team besides Masterminds. So maybe could you tell us a little bit of a history lesson on Darksided's journey and how they prevailed to be a top 4 roster?
So Darkside have actually been they've existed for the past few open divisions. They've been around since the later half of 2017 even, and they've had pretty much a whole new roster moving into 2018. 2 remaining original members from the open division stuff from 2017. They had a new member join them earlier on for this open division, and then half their team. 2 of the members went to Blank Pacific. One of their members stepped out from the game altogether, and they ended up acquiring 3 of the members from the team that actually finished technically above them in Open Division this season in second place. Darksided came third place. This other team called Skrilla came in second place, and 3 of those members ended up joining Darksided. So of the top 4 teams, which is the main narrative of how Australian Contenders looks like, Darksided was the only team to make really massive roster reshuffling. They also got a player called Termo from the Sydney Drop Bears roster as well. So, there was a bit of a player swap, or one-sided player swap at that. And I think there were definitely questions coming into contenders regarding whether Darksided could keep up the respect of being a top 4 team, whether they could keep up the results to stay in that top 4 as well, whether another team was going to come in like Legacy to try and unseat them. And I mean, it's very clear now that at the end of this path, and we're not actually really at the end yet, but towards the end of the path, they're 5-0 in the regular season. They've just 3-0 in their quarterfinal. They definitely look like not even, you said they were heavy favorites for the quarterfinal. I think they're definitely potential, not necessarily heavy, but they're definitely big favorites going into the top 4, the semifinal, and maybe even grand final. So this is the team that people really have to respect right now. And also they're looking for a victory, which is, I guess, an obvious thing to say, but Darkseid are also a team that have come second a lot in the past. They've come second, they come third, they came third in the last open division. So they've always, unfortunately, when it really gets to crunch and they really have to take that number 1 spot, they look fantastic all season, and then they come second. So right now they're trying to break that curse and finally come first.
Trying to break that curse, getting second all the time, you don't want to say it's a meme, but there are some teams that get that second place meme. But just to touch upon how they went through a roster reshuffling, as you said, and you would think they would go through some growing pains, drop a couple games, but they went undefeated despite all that they've went through, and really proving that although they went through that reshuffling, they are a top 4 roster. Which now leads into the second match of Legacy versus Drop Bears. The final score again being a 3-0, so it was a quick day.
Yes,
so it's
the
probably
whole quarterfinals was.
Yeah, but yeah, there was only one map that. Anyway, we'll get into that one. But it's probably fair to say that if there were to be an upset between the 4 matches, that this would probably be the one, Legacy versus Drop Bears. Map 1 on Nepal was the closest match. It was 100-83, and then 100-99 on Sanctum, and incredible retake and plays coming out of the Drop Bears. And I felt like I saw Legacy's confidence started to dwindle away. The maps got less and less close, and it ended in a 3-0. But could you tell us maybe if you had bigger expectations for Legacy to take this one? I mean, some people, we're going to put money on the upset, but why did they fall so short in this match when they actually had a pretty decent running in the regular season?
I mean, there's a lot of questions surrounding that, right? And
Yeah.
Legacy actually came into this fresh from a boot camp as well. They got together as their whole team and their coach together in Sydney for a in-person boot camp, and during that boot camp they lost to Blank Blue. I believe it was 0-4. Now they've come to this. They've lost 0-3 against Sydney Drop Bears. But mind you, like Blank Blue and Sydney Drop Bears, they're in that coveted top 4 club, that very exclusive top 4 club. And Legacy for the longest time have been this, 5th place team. They've been the gatekeepers of number 5, but they don't want to be number 5. They want to be at least number 4, 3, 2, and then eventually number 1. So, Legacy, this was expected to be, I guess, somewhat of a tighter match, just because they have that kind of reputation. They have the reputation of being the ones that are nearly there, that are nearly, breaking through the mold. At least they seem to be the closest team right now. There are a couple of other teams that are sort of in that category as well. Jam, which we'll touch on later, are sort of in that group. Kanga are kind of getting there as well, but Legacy have kind of led the pack in that. The next 4, there's a top 4, then there's the next 4, and then in the next 4, Legacy have usually been the best team among those next 4 teams. But even then, it's just kind of, judging by their recent results. By the way, they also went 0-4 against Darkside in the regular season. So it's like every time they come up against one of these top 4 teams, they kind of fall apart a little bit. Also a big testament to how good these other top 4 teams are. But then Legacy are also the team that beat all the other teams below them. So they're in a really interesting spot. So going into the Sydney Drop Bears matchup, you're kind of thinking, if anyone's going to really challenge a top 4 team, if anyone is going to start taking maps off them, pushing them to a map 5 even, or threatening to even win the entire match, putting the Drop Bears on the back foot, it probably should have been Legacy. It probably also should have been Legacy to have a better map score against Blank Blue in the regular season, and also Darksided. But I think this team just definitely still needs quite a bit of work, and they've had a couple of new members. But even talking about rosters, like Darkside have had a lot more than just a few members, and they're still managing just to stay where they are. So Legacy, season 2 is going to end up being the season for them. Like Knock Predators, they get to sort of auto qualify. They've had a lot more experience and a lot more time than Knock Predators, so they're a little bit further ahead in that regard, but they still need to go further still. So.
Yeah, I wish that match was a little bit closer between Legacy and Drop Bears, and that was the one we were all betting that would be, I wouldn't say game 5, but just closer in terms of the score. And I think everybody, once, in the next season, will have more experience together, as long as they don't go through any major roster changes. They can actually build some synergy. But this will lead us into the next match that actually did not end in a 3-0. Masterminds versus Kanga Esports. And Numbani was a whole different look for Kanga. They handed Masterminds their first map loss in all of Contenders Season 1, which was surprising for me to see. And they managed to complete the map on Numbani and prevented Masterminds from reaching Point C, just to summarize how that map went. So Kanga was the only team to take a map off of the top 4 teams in quarterfinals, which of course happened on Numbani. So what was it about Kanga or about Masterminds that led to that 3-1 score?
That was actually a pretty surprising score. But at the same time, I think Masterminds are in an interesting place right now. They've been a team that have, in the past, they've certainly had a dynasty stage in Australia before, where they just kind of won everything. And, even when they weren't winning everything, they were, always getting reasonably top placements. So, but coming into the quarterfinal now, or actually moving past the quarterfinal technically, they seem like slightly weaker than maybe some of the other top 4 teams. And I think Kanga have been also that team that's trying to trailblaze in that next 4 category a little bit as well. So Kanga kind of came in as, I think, into the regular season as reasonably, I don't necessarily want to say weak, but they definitely weren't going to be a favorite for, they weren't going to be a favorite to make it into quarterfinals, obviously, but also, there was some doubts as to whether they could even make the quarterfinals to start with. And they had a main rival in their group called Serenity, who, it was between them. It was between Serenity or Kanga to make it into that top 4 of their group. And, this is also in regards to Legacy. We talked about Legacy earlier. Legacy actually beat Kanga 4-0, so there's even potentially some gap there. But at the same time, I think Kanga's taken some pretty big strides in the past few weeks, definitely after their Legacy loss, and they ended up having a better score against a top 4 team than Legacy ended up having. So I wouldn't mind seeing Legacy versus Kanga again. And Kanga getting that one map, when you watch the series and you look at Numbani specifically, you could see how much momentum they had in that particular match. I think there was a real possibility that they could have gotten another map as well. I think, you look at map 3, that was generally, it wasn't, there was an opportunity for them as well. Map 1 as well, they had opportunities there. I think Kanga, they're getting reasonably close, and they've also had some role swaps. So they had Roro go from hit scan to projectile to flex DPS, and he's actually had a really great run now on that team. They brought Locus in, who was sort of an ex-member from Darksided as a tracer player, so he's also had a huge impact on that team. So Kanga specifically have started to really come together in terms of realizing where their strengths are and then really playing to it, and that sort of just shows their ability to be able to take maps off of really good teams. And now I'm actually really excited to see how Kanga end up doing in Season 2, because obviously they qualify into Contenders Season 2 for Australia as well. Yeah, this ended up being the match of the quarterfinal instead of the Legacy versus Drop Bears match.
Yeah, pretty surprising that, like you said, the giving an undefeated team their first loss in the quarterfinals, where this is where teams really start to focus. There's no time to screw around in that. And it's not that I think Masterminds dropped the ball. It's just, like you said, there was a lot of momentum for Kanga. And although they dropped map 1, they were able to keep that composure and actually finish off Numbani. And like I said, we're able to hold that defense against Masterminds, which are an incredibly offensive and aggressive team. But that was, although it ended in a 3-1, unfortunately, we're going to say goodbye to Kanga in the playoffs, but we're looking forward to seeing them in Season 2 for sure, and hopefully they'll take a few more maps off of these top 4 teams, and we'll see a new top 4 contenders after that. But final match now, Blank Blue versus Just a Minute or Jam. So this last match was probably the least closest, in my opinion. Ilios
they lost at Just a Minute.
Yeah, probably. That's how long my VOD review was. But 100-65 and 100-0 on Ilios for the 2-0. Numbani was pretty convincing 3-2 for Blank, although Jam made it pretty far if you want to be positive about it. And Hanamura, Jam finished in overtime, and then it was easy. Blank had so much time to just get the 33% they needed for the hot 3-0. But let's forget about the playoffs. Let's focus on the future of Jam. Because there really isn't that much to talk about in this match. So what would it take for Jam to reach the top 4, or to break into the top 4? So should they reshape their roster? Do you think it's a question of spending more time as a team to build synergy and experience to eventually lead them to the top 4, or what do you think they need to do?
Well, they've actually done a decent amount of roster reshaping throughout the season. So it's not like Darksided, who did this huge roster change up just prior to the season and stuck it through. Jam in the most recent times seem stable now, but during the first few weeks of Contenders, they seem to be struggling with identifying who their starting 6 was going to be, who exactly is other players on Jam. And at least we can, there's one thing they've kept pretty consistent, and the player I guess most people would know from this roster is AVRL from the Australian Overwatch World Cup team from 2017 that made the BlizzCon. So AVRL had a pretty decent performance against Canada. That was when Australia nearly beat Canada, but not quite good enough. So AVRL is on the Jam squad as a tracer player, and he's been, I guess, the easy standout. If anyone watches their team play, I think, easily the most notable player, easily the most notable name, easily the most memorable person there as well. So they've had some decent successes with him on their roster. They seem now to have a pretty decent core of players. I'm unsure of whether they'll continue with that going to Season 2 or make some shuffles. My instinct would say that potentially shuffles are on the way, not because they're Jam, but I think just in general, after a Contender season, you're going to see a decent amount of teams, looking for upgrades or looking for some roster improvement options across the board, not just for Jam, but for every single team if they can help it. So Jam are definitely not excluded from that. They're going to pretty much be within that mix. So I'm expecting to see how I'm excited to see how their roster sort of looks going into Season 2. But I mean, they kind of fall into the same boat as Legacy, Kanga, Knock Predators, all of that, right? They've had you know, a somewhat easier journey than the other teams because they came through as the #1 team in trials. So there was a lot of hype around what they could potentially do, and you know, are they going to get close enough? They actually had a really, you know, they were very confident in their opening match against Sydney Drop Bears, but then they went 0-4. This is when Drop Bears were coming in with a couple fresh members and a couple of questions on their heads, and Jam was coming in very hot, very confident, #1 place team from trials. They're saying, look, we can take it to a top 4 team straight away. That wasn't the case. Unfortunately, now they end the season, and you know, still not the case where they can't. They're just not quite there, especially against a team like Blank Blue, who, you know, they were the winners from Open Division of last season to qualify into Contenders. They're one of the favorites in Contenders. The only team that they lost to is Darksided, which actually speaks to Darksided's strength. But Blank Blue have been a team that have been around for that. The core of that roster, specifically the 4 members of that core roster, have been around for over a year now. They are previously LAN winners as well, so this is a very experienced and veteran squad, which is ironic because most of their players are like under 18. They're very young as well. They're a veteran squad for like how super young. The average age is something like 17. They might be a little bit older now because one of their members just turned 16, so maybe that 17 average just went up for Blank Blue. But like, they're a team of kids who are like ridiculously good, and they're like they're about to make another LAN. It's actually insane with parents because they need parental supervision.
Oh my god.
They might too. I think they probably will.
Need a chaperone.
Yeah, but back to Jam, right? Jam are just not quite like I'm gonna have to end up saying very similar things about Jam as I did for Legacy and Knock Predators, and for Kanga at that rate, because they're all 4 of these teams are in a place where they're fighting to try and break into that top 4, but there's just an obvious gap. When you look at the results overall, 3-0, 3-0, 3-1, 3-0. One team got one map out of, like, you know, out of all the possible maps that could have been taken. One map is what that top 4 collectively lost. Top 4 collectively went 12-1 in the quarterfinals. It's pretty ridiculous. So everyone else has a lot of catch-up work to do, and you know, for teams that are not Legacy to even get to the top 4, first they got to make sure they're actually better than Legacy, which not all of them can even prove just yet. So again, Legacy are kind of like that 5th place gatekeeper. So, you know, if you can't beat Legacy, you're not getting into the top 4 anytime soon.
Right.
Legacy themselves can't even take a map off the top 4 right now. So
it's a struggle.
The skill gap is definitely there, and Jam is no exception, unfortunately. But I am looking forward to how they'll do in Season 2.
Well, I'm just looking forward to how this sort of bottom 8 or bottom 4, just any new team to sort of take away the top 4 spot from seems to be the same teams or the same rosters that are at the top. And whether it's, you know, reshaping the roster around Ater, I think you said was the Star Tracer player, or just completely getting a new roster. Maybe there's some new talent coming up next year, but it'll be exciting Season 2 to see maybe if someone else can get the top 4 crown. But now the last question. I think this will be a hot one. I think everyone wants to hear your take on this. Predictions for the semifinals: Darksided versus Drop Bears, Masterminds versus Blank Blue. Not to spend too much time on it, but I want to hear your hot take on those.
So this is what people want to see, right? Because we talk a long time about top 4 teams, and you know, they've met each other once, and not even the other teams. They met each other, you know, the same team in their group once during the regular season. And those were some good matches. Some of them were kind of unexpectedly one-sided, actually. Masterminds beating Drop Bears 4-0. But now going to the semi-final, there was definitely no mistake that these are going to be the teams there. As for predictions, though, Sydney Drop Bears versus Darksided is going to be a really tight match, only because when you look at the past, these two teams matching up in the past, you've had cases where before Drop Bears were even known as Drop Bears and they were under the old name 4 Leagues, Darksided definitely beat them. The reverse has definitely happened in the past, even in recent community tournaments that these teams have participated in outside of Contenders. Darksided came second to Drop Bears, who came first very recently in a community tournament. That was like a 3-2 victory. That could have gone either way.
Oh,
that
wow.
could have been a 3-2 to Darksided. That could have, you know, that could have easily. Whoever showed up better on the day could have taken it. I think a very similar thing is going to happen on semifinals. Both teams are going to be boot camping for that. Both teams are taking that very seriously. Both teams want that #1 spot. Darksided, like I said, they've had a lot of #2s in the past. I will correct that very briefly and say they did come first in a community tournament sort of around the similar time to start of Contenders, where they ended up beating the Pacific Blank squad. I guess unofficially, but kind of officially because it was still a tournament.
Right.
So Darksider have got that first victory there, but they're not looking to win those kind of things. That's nice. They're looking to win Contenders, and to do that, they need to be Drop Bears, who recently have been looking absolutely fantastic. This is a super hard one to call because I think both teams have equal chances of beating each other. I think this
like
could have been the grand final. I think this could have been the grand final. Like Darksider versus Sydney Drop Bears almost should be the grand final in some cases because both of these teams are just looking that good. But I think it's going to end up being something like a 3-2 to the best team that shows up on the day. But right now, if I was going to look at it right now, I'd say Darksided. I'm going to favor Darksided because I think they have had a generally better showing across the board. 5-0 in their group. Drop Bears went 4-1 in their group, went 0-4 against Masterminds. I know that was at least, some weeks back now, and the current Drop Bears form has improved, but, going off official results, Darksided come in a little bit harder onto that. Darksided are also generally have been a more consistent team. Drop Bears, if they can, if they're going 0-4 against Masterminds and then coming back later, it's like, are they going, are they on a bit of a roller coaster? Do they go up and then they go down? Where's the consistency? I want to see that for them as well. But it is going to come down to whoever shows up better on the day. On to the other semi-final, Masterminds versus Blank Blue. Blank Blue, like I said, they're previous Open Div winners. They've beaten all the other teams in the past at some point. In fact, every team has kind of beaten every other team in the top 4 in the past at some juncture, which is why this particular top 4 is so exciting, because you don't know exactly who's going to come out on top. But right now, Blank Blue, despite Masterminds having a near-perfect season, the fact that they did drop a map, I'm not going to hold it too much against them. They were also the only team to drop a map, let's be honest. They are also, I think, the only team that are kind of not extremely sure of how to utilize their roster. Masterminds have like a 8-man roster. If not even 9 people, they've got like 8 people on their roster, and they change members in and out of that core very quickly. Like, it's almost like Overwatch League styles, but like even a little bit more extreme, because they just sort of rotate members in and out per map, and you don't know exactly which members you might see on any given day, and
like what to expect, like good or bad.
Ways, in some ways, I think that hurts Masterminds because they're not getting a consistent, their team, their roster, their players are not getting consistency among their own team. And I think if you look at some of their results, it does seem a bit weird, and why they choose to run. It's almost getting towards a Dallas Fuel levels of like, why is this person playing instead of this person? Why is this person now playing this role and on this hero instead of that guy who he knows? But it's getting really confusing to that kind of degree almost. And in general, going on recent like momentum, because I think momentum is really important going into these semifinals. Masterminds do look a bit weaker than Blank, but I believe it will still be really hot and really close. And Blank are also another team that they, like I said, they're a young team, right? Like unfortunately, there's definitely emotions a contributive factor for this team, so they need to be feeling good. They need to be confident going up against a team like Masterminds. When Blank Blue, if they're not feeling good, if they're not warmed up, they might struggle a bit. So this is a team that needs to come in hot on the day as well. So I'm going to say Masterminds and Darksided for the grand final.
I thought you were going to lean towards Blank Blue at the end.
Blank Blue and Darksided.
Okay, you changed your mind.
Blue and Darksided.
So Darksided and Blank Blue for the grand finals. I mean, you guys heard it here first, and I want to go message y'all if it ain't going to be that. But like, I mean, just kidding. But either way, I think all of these are going to be really tight matches, and almost sometimes probably coming down to in-game decisions and those little in-game mistakes that might cost one the map or not, or what kind of emotions are you coming in to these kind of maps. And you said this was going to be on, is it semifinals and grand finals that are on LAN? Yeah. And so you got that whole LAN setting, you got young players. Have they been to LAN, or how much experience they have on LAN? And LAN has this whole emotional stress
young
setting.
Young players have more experience on LAN than most of the other players, by the way.
Well,
which is funny.
Today I learned.
It's ironic, right?
It is ironic, but I'm so excited to see these semifinal matches, and we've gone through the history and everything about the rest of these teams, and it'll be exciting to not only see how the grand finals are going to shape, but also season 2 coming up for the Australian scene. So thank you so much, Kevin, for coming on for this interview.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And for those that are, interested, semifinals going to grand finals is going to be on May 19th. I believe it goes over 2 days, so it's May 19th and May 20th. And so that's going to be really exciting, and hopefully we'll see everyone there. And just a very quick thank you to ESL for running Contenders Australia and Full Circle for providing broadcast coverage of Contenders Pacific.
I mean, shout out to everybody behind the scenes making Contenders happen and really showcasing these players to hopefully be picked up for Al. I mean, these young players will have to wait a couple years, but besides that, it's incredible to see people from around the world compete at the highest level of Overwatch. But that will be the end of this interview. Thank you, Kevin, for coming on, and we'll see you guys next week for some Overwatch Contenders Daily.